All right, next up we're gonna go all around the camera and tell you what all the buttons, the switches, the nomenclature, anything that's on the camera. I'm gonna describe it to you real quick. The first item is the focal plane mark. And basically that's where the sensor resides in the camera. And it's just for you to know how close you can get before you start losing focus. And if we look at this lens, this is I put it on my smallest lens. This is my 50 1.8. It's a great lens. It's only like $100. It's surprisingly good. But if I were to buy a lens today, Fast 50 Prime, I'll probably get the 1.4 just because you can focus a bit easier with it. This says 0.45 or 1.5 feet away. So basically, you can get about, I don't know, maybe this close to the lens or this close to I guess, the sensor before you can't focus anymore. So basically, that is the focal plane mark. Real quick, I want to explain a little bit of a color code system that they've got on the back of the camera to maybe help you. Blue indicates anything that's really playback related, like you can rate the photo, you can zoom in on the photo, you can play the photo, you can delete the photo. And white usually indicates something that you're going to do in terms of taking a picture or taking a video. All right, this is going to seem real obvious, but these are your loops for your neck strap. Something else that you can do that you might not think of is if you get a battery grip below the camera, you can have another strap below there, so you can take a strap all the way around, so it's kind of like a camcorder style, and you can hold it this way. I just wanted to mention that because maybe some people are coming from a camcorder background and maybe want to give that a try. I have a friend that has one and he seems to like it a lot. Our cold shoe is on the top of the camera. It's also a hot shoe. For photography, you'd use a flash, but for us video guys, we really can't use any power coming off of here to light an LED panel or something like that. So a lot of times what I will use it for, besides mounting an LED light up there, if I really have to, I usually don't like to have it like blazing into the person's eyes, is I'll use my Sennheiser G3 series, and I'll just take this and plug it into the mic input. So there's a lot of different uses you can use for the hot shoe, and this is just one of them. All right, right here is our dioptric adjustment for our eye. This is not really video related, but since we're going to be using some stills functions to capture video, I would definitely want to point this out. So basically what you do is you take it with your thumb, go into not live view, but photography mode, put your eye up to it, and what you want to do is press like the shutter halfway down, and you'll see some green text on the bottom. And what you want to do is move that dioptric adjustment around until you see the text at the bottom clearly, not the image in the frame. You don't want to do that, just the text on the bottom. And then once you've got that set, you pretty much don't have to touch that again. And the other thing to point out really quick, this is your viewfinder, is if you squeeze it right about here and you can lift this off, basically if you're a person that wears glasses, you can put your glass right up to this hard surface rather than putting it up to this nice cushiony eyepiece, and then to put it back on, it just snaps right into place. All right, next up is the power button. Of course, this might sound really obvious. The only thing I want to point out with this is I'm pretty good at getting these Canon cameras to lock up occasionally. Not so much the 5D Mark III. I've gotten other Rebel lines of cameras, although this one has. If you ever run into a situation where you turn it on, the camera's on, and you turn it off, and the camera is still on, which definitely happens, what you do in that situation is just pull the battery out, wait about 10 seconds, put it back in, and that kind of reboots it. So basically, even though the power says off, there's still, I think the electronics are still being powered within the camera. So this off switch isn't really totally off. You pretty much have to pull the battery. All right, 4 buttons along the top here. First one on the right-hand side is our lights up our LCD panel. This is great for when I'm doing astrophotography at night and I don't want to turn my headlamp on. To be honest, I don't use this LCD panel all that much for video-related items. I do for photography, but to be honest, I don't use it. I don't look down at it. Maybe because I came from a Canon T2i background and I never had that panel. So the next one is the ISO button. This you will use a lot, and this is how I primarily change my ISO quickly. And to change it, you just press the ISO button and then you move the main dial. And we're going to be covering ISO a lot later. AF drive. This one I don't use that often because I usually stay in the same mode for video. But if you wanted to change it for live view, this is how you would change it. And I usually leave it on quick focus. And if photography related, you use the quick control dial down here to change it for photography related items on how the shutter works. Next one is our white balance. I do use this quite a bit. It's great because you can quickly get in and change your temperature between like daylight or tungsten. And we're going to be covering a whole chapter on white balance, but it's great because you can access that quite quickly. All right, like I talked about before, this is our main dial at the front of the camera. The main dial for us on the video side of things, main dial equals shutter speed, which is, this camera is designed for stills, and this is a very easily accessible control. What's ironic for us is, we can change this around, make it darker. Here's like 1/320, and let's say this is 1/, it's 30th of a second, 1/30. It's only giving you a 30 here, but it's actually 1/30. What's interesting is, on the video side of things, we're only going to use like 3 different shutter speeds. So while this is a very easily accessible control, we're not going to use it that much. All right, next up is our shutter button. And you might be thinking, Dave, we're doing video, we're not doing stills. The reason I bring up the shutter button is because what I use is quick focus a lot in video mode. So when you press the shutter halfway down, you can hear, boom, it locked on. You hear a little confirmation beep. The shutter goes, the mirror goes up and then comes back down again. So it's a wonderful tool, and we'll get more into that later for focus. And if you can't get focus, I'm going to put my hand very close to it. And like we talked about before, focal plane mark, it won't be able to acquire focus. I'm so close. And there's no confirmation beep. It's trying to find it, can't find it, can't do it. It's trying, but it can't do it. And then if I take my hand away, boom, it does it. So this is a great technique for focusing in live view or in video mode. All right, next up is our menu button. It's probably the easiest button on this whole entire camera because it only does one thing. It gets you into the menu and it gets you out of the menu. A lot of these buttons, like for instance, the info button, like I'll press it once, it does one thing, press it again, blank screen, gets us the stuff on the bottom, whole bunch of quick items here, histogram, level, and then back through again. But the menu button, quite easy, just one press. And the info button, multiple presses to cycle through all the different screens you want to see. All right, next up is this button right here, start stop. In the video mode, it's really easy. You just press it, it starts your recording or it stops your recording. Now, when you flip the switch here, because you see this is red nomenclature for video, and if I move it over here to the white, that indicates that it's this is your photography mode. And when you press the start stop button in photography mode, it sends you to live view. And you might get, the only reason I say that is you might get confused. You're like, you hit the start stop button again, thinking that you're in video mode, but it sends you back to this, stills related screen. So if that's the case, just flip it on over to movie mode and then start your recording that way. All right, next button is our quick button right here. And as the name applies, it's quick. So for things like sound recording, if you wanted to adjust the sound recording, you can get to that quite quickly. All I have to do is just change this quick control dial. Now, let's say, for instance, you're not in quick mode anymore and you wanted to get to it to the main menu. You're like, oh, I got to go all the way over here. Where is it? You got to find it. So, oh, there's sound recording, and then you can go to manual and then change it from here, which can be, it's very time consuming doing it that way. So you can do like frame rates, resolution, and audio quite quickly from the quick menu. All right, now we're going to explain all this stuff around here. Basically, this is your quick control dial. So it's basically when you're like in the menu, want to get to something. It's like, oh, I want to get to grid display. And then the center set button is kind of like a return button on your keyboard. So it's like, yeah, I want 3x3 grid. And then you've chosen it. Now, so those we've kind of covered already, but the one we haven't covered, and it's kind of almost invisible and you can't see, and sometimes it's hard to figure out how to get to, is what's called the touchpad. And it's kind of resides in between the two. And it's great for when you're actually in recording and you don't want to make any big clunky changes to the camera and you want to do a light touch with just your finger. So let's go to, like we're recording a video. So we'll hit record. And then we hit the Q button, it brings up this touchpad. So here I can actually go and change the mic level. See how I'm lightly touching, and then the record level is coming up higher and higher. Or let's say we want to go to aperture or shutter speed, I can then change the shutter speed quite quietly. Most of the time I'm not going to change the shutter speed or the aperture while I'm recording. I'm not going to change the ISO either. The one thing that I do use is if like somebody's talking and they're talking a little bit too loudly, I can bring the level down. All right, next up, the erase button, pretty self-explanatory. But before we talk about it, we really have to talk about the play button. So if you hit play, obviously it's going to bring up like your last image that you'd either shot photography-wise or video-wise. So to get rid of it, you hit the delete button, scroll over and press set or enter basically, and it gets rid of the image. Now there's a lot more advanced ways you can delete files. On the camera you can basically delete multiple groups, folders, a whole bunch of stuff, and we'll go into that more later when we dive deep into the menu. The play button, pretty obvious. If you want to play something, you just press it once and then you can scroll through and find the clip that you want to play. And the next thing I want to talk about is the zoom button. So in photography, let's say if we hit play and we find an actual still that we shot, this one right here, which is just of my USB drive. If I hit the zoom button, it's wonderful. I can actually, let's say, scroll up here and we can actually view this USB drive, which is great, awesome. So let's say we record a video. So I'm gonna record a video for a few seconds, hit stop. Now I'm gonna hit play. It'll bring up the last one we just did, which is great. And then we hit the zoom button and it brings up this menu over here. And it's like, okay, that's our main dial. So let's see what we can do. Oh, we can actually see multiple images or even more. So you can see what you've been shooting. But if you go the other way, it says cannot magnify. It's kind of a bummer. I would love to have this feature, is you'd be able to magnify into a video that you've already shot to see if things are in focus, because these screens are so tiny. One of the external accessories you can get is like a field monitor, and you can see things much better on a larger display. But with it such a small display, it is kind of a bummer that you cannot zoom into your videos that you've already recorded. All right, so we can't zoom in while we're recording the video, and we can't zoom in once we're on playback, which is unfortunate. But what we can do is we can zoom in, check our focus before we start recording. And if you hit the zoom button, this magnifying glass, and use this multi-controller up here, you can jog around and check your focus. Oops, I just lost it. There we go. And so I can move the lens around and I can check my focus. Now, if you press, that was 5x, as you can see down here. If I press it again, I will go 10x, and I can reframe it here, and I can see if I've got focus, and it sure looks like I do. Now, the problem is, if you want to get out of that, you just press the magnifying glass again, is the buttons over on this side, and this is something that you'll use a ton, and you want to have kind of a control over on your right hand to be able to access that quickly. And what I've done, and we're going to get into this more later on when we dive deep into the menu, but I've created the set button as a zoom. So you can set it to a lot of different things, but in this particular mode, while we're in video mode, before we hit record, we can hit the set button and it does the same exact thing. So it does 5x once, press it again, 10x, press it again, you're out. So it's a great feature to have, and I'll show you how to set that up later. All right, next up is our AF on button. You can assign this button to do lots of different things like you can with the set button. Most of the stuff that you can assign it to do, it's mostly photography related. The way I've got it set up is if you press the shutter halfway down on the front, you can focus, and you can do the same thing with the AF button on the back. And I pretty much think that's the default way it's set up. And when we get to the later part of the menus, we'll go through that. But pretty much doesn't have that much to do with shooting video. All right, working our way over is the star button. Star button is kind of useless, and I'll show you why. Right now I'm shooting in TV mode on the mode dial, and again, it's not something I want you guys to do, but I want to just demonstrate this button really quick. So if I'm in TV mode and I'm not on auto ISO, but I've selected my ISO. I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself here, but I just want to demonstrate this really quick. If I rotate the camera to a very dark part of the image, you'll see the actual image increase. It basically is changing the aperture because the ISO is locked, the shutter is locked, so it's basically changing the aperture. And you can see it there. Now if I wanted to go to where it's and keep this exposure right here, all I have to do is hit the star button. You'll see the star button appear right here. And then what's going to happen is when I rotate it, it's locked the exposure. So again, if you're going to be locking the exposure, you might as well rotate this over to the manual mode and then set your aperture where you want it. I just wanted to demonstrate what that button does. For what we're going to be doing, you really have no use for it. All right, next up we're going to talk about this button right here, and this selects our points on the screen where we can focus to. Couple of different ways to control it. We can control it from here. We can go up, down, left, and right with our multi-controller, or we can go up and down with this. You can see the blue cursor going up and down, or we can go left to right using the main dial. So if I want to go up, I usually use this to select it. And then when you want to change the top part, you press this M-FN button, which you can, just by pressing it, will toggle you through all the different modes that you can select. And again, we're going to be talking a lot more about focus later. All right, next up is our access lamp right here. And if we hit record, you'll see that it's accessing, or it's writing to the SD or CF card. Or it's, when you see it flash, it could be reading from. But a lot of times when you hit play, for instance, we play back what we just did, you'll notice that it accessed it really quickly and then it's not flashing much at all later. So it usually just loads it up into the buffer and sends it on out. A few things to keep in mind about the access lamp. You don't want to pull the card out while it's recording, or you'll most likely get corrupted data on your card. Another thing you don't want to do is just open up the card door, not even to take it out, just to open that card door could corrupt the data while you're recording. Another thing, obviously if you pulled the battery out while you're recording, you could also get corrupted data. So basically you don't want to do those three things while you see the access lamp flashing. All right, down here we have our lock button. And so right now, as you can see, I can change the aperture, but if I switch over the lock button, you'll see the word lock comes up, and so I can't change it. You can assign this, and we'll get to this more later, of what that lock button can do. There's other things it can lock down. To be honest, I never ever slide that over. I never have a problem of changing the aperture accidentally, so I never use this button. All right, next up is this button right here. I call it the picture style button because if you press it, you can get access to all the picture styles with the main dial quite easily. And then if you use this, you can access the sharpness, contrast. And we're going to be talking a lot about this later, but it's a really quick, easy way to get your picture styles. We should just call it the picture style button. But actually, it's called something else, and it does a lot of different things for photography. If we hit play, we can actually use this button again in the play mode with the main dial to go back and forth to find different clips and kind of A/B compare them. To be honest, I've never really used it that way. Then what you can do too is once you find the clip you want, this button right here, which is the next one down, if you wanted to rate it, let's go find a video actually. This nice boring blue shot I've got here, if I wanted to rate it like 5 stars, boom, I've got 5 stars. All right, 2 more items on the back. We got 3 little pinholes in here, and that's your speaker that faces towards you so you can hear, obviously. The microphones in the front that face your talent. We'll get to that a little bit later. And then this little black dot right here is your light sensor for your display. So if you're using the display and it's sort of a automatic brightness mode, it'll adjust it based off this little sensor on the back. All right, next up is our battery compartment door. This might seem really easy or obvious, but there's one thing I want to show you. So if you get a battery grip, there's this little slider switch right here, a little slider. And you just slide towards yourself, and then you can pull the door out. And once you've got the door out, then you can insert your battery grip. And then you put it back in, you find that hole on that side, squeeze, and then you're ready to put it back together. All right, really there's only one thing at the bottom of the camera, and that is our thread to accept a little tripod like this. Now, when I first started, I was really confused on thread sizes because basically in photography, there's two different types. There's what's called the 1/4 20, which means it's a 1/4 inch in diameter, and then there's the 3/8. So there's a big difference between the two. So what accepts on the bottom of the camera is a 1/4 20. So you can mount like a little mini tripod like this on there, or like a plate, a quick release plate. But for larger items, and I was really confused in the beginning. I was like, what do I need to order here? Because there's these two different thread sizes. But the larger one is always for things like ball heads, or in this case, this is my fluid head on my monopod. And it has a much bigger, so it's stronger, because a 1/4 20 might not be able to take this kind of force and torque, torquing around with the fluid head. So the smaller one is the camera, quick release plates. The bigger one is for like your fluid head or your ball heads, basically. All right, next up, we're going to talk about all these ports on the side of the camera. Starting at the top left is our microphone input. I use basically two mics when I'm connecting directly to the camera. The first one is the Video Mic Pro, which you're listening to right now. Awesome little mic. It's not that expensive. I wouldn't suggest getting the regular Rode video mic because you'll get some noisy results. I used to own that one. This one's much better. It has 20 dB more gain in it. Basically what that means is I can have the microphone, this microphone, do most of the work, and I can turn the preamp inside the camera, and I'll show you how to do this later, all the way down, basically one click up. So I'm basically not using the preamp hardly at all inside the camera, so I get some really nice clean audio with not a whole bunch of noise. Obviously the other microphone I showed you was the Sennheiser G3 model, and that's also very similar to this microphone, where it's very, very hot signal, and you can put it right into the camera. You don't have to do any dual sync sound if you're lazy like I am. There's situations where I do dual sync sound where I record it on a different recorder with a different microphone, but that kind of goes beyond the scope of this course. Next one down, this is flash related, so we're not going to talk about it. Next one down is our remote control port. So we can connect a remote control device and create stunning time lapses like this one I did at night. You can do them during the day, night, doesn't matter. But basically you can, and this is a third-party one, much cheaper than the Canon model. Works great. There's a little battery in there. It lasts years. I've had this one for a really long time. And then you basically just connect it up to the camera. I always remember you always point towards the front of the camera because there's these three little pins in here, are very delicate, and I don't want to bend them or break them. So, and it's keyed, so it only goes in one way, but I never want to force it. So it always faces the front of the camera. Then you just set it, and you can take a picture from right here, or you can set it to take pictures like every few seconds, like I do, to create a really cool time lapse. One of these days I plan to create a course on how to make time-lapse videos. All right, next up is our headphone jack, and you can use a lot of different headphones for this. One of the things about this headphone jack, it's kind of weak. It doesn't put out a ton of volume depending on the type of earbuds or headphones that you use. So one of the things I did is I did a lot of research a while back, and I bought these AKG headphones, and they're the hottest or most efficient, loudest earbuds I could get. So when I use these and I want to be in a very discreet situation, they're black, so I'm not like using like the iPhone headphones that were all white. They're great because they're really loud, and so I can really hear if something's going on, if I'm getting ear interference on my wireless microphone, or there's wind noise happening, especially in a really loud environment. You'll be able to monitor things a lot better. There's a lot of different other headphones out there, but I just mentioned that because these are really loud. And these are the AKG K318. I don't know if they make them anymore, but I'm pretty sure they do because I just bought those about 6 months ago. Next one down we've kind of already talked about is our AV out digital. So it's your USB port, or if you really want to use that other cable, which I don't recommend using, you could connect it up to an older TV. And then the last one is our HDMI out. The HDMI out is great for a lot of different reasons. You can use set to a field monitor, so you have a larger display so you can see what you're doing. Let's say you mount this camera at the end of a crane and it's 20 feet up and you've got your monitor down low where you're controlling the crane and moving it around. You can actually see what you're doing. There's a lot of other different uses. One of the things I'll mention with this is you got to be very careful of this, because I've heard horror stories of people that have it plugged into HDMI and then they torque on the cord and it'll break the circuitry going to the circuit board, and then they have to send it to Canon and it's like a $300 or $400 repair. So definitely be careful of that. There are devices that you can buy. I haven't reviewed them yet, but there's some really cool ones out there that'll create a lock mechanism so it's not going to go anywhere and it won't bust your internals. So definitely, if you're going to be using that port a lot, you might want to buy one of those. All right, working around to the front of the camera, we've got our depth of field preview button. In terms of video, it does nothing for us, so we really don't need to talk about it. All right, next up we have these two items right here real quick. This is our remote control sensor. So you have an RC6, which is a remote control. I think it works about 16 feet away. I don't own one, but I understand you can start and stop your recording quite easily. I should definitely get one of those. I use the ES utility software, like right here. I'm starting and stopping my T3i remotely, which is quite nice. But if you're out in the field, this might be a good option. And then right here, your self timer lamp. It's photography related. Basically, it'll blink if you're doing some sort of like self-portrait of yourself or a group of people and you're wanting to be in the shot. It'll blink and count down just before it takes the picture. All right, next up is our microphone right here. Not the best microphone in the world. It'll do in a pinch. There's sometimes I've actually had really good results with it if you're interviewing somebody, let's say 3 or 4 feet away, and it's a pretty decently quiet environment. It'll work in a pinch if you have to use it, but I don't recommend using it for really high quality results. And then right here we've got our lens mount release, which we've kind of demonstrated already. All right, next up we're going to talk about SD cards and CF cards. SD cards have an advantage usually that they're cheaper, and CF cards' advantage usually is they're a lot more rugged. And usually they have faster speeds, or the cards that come out are usually the fastest, and then the SD cards usually start catching up. We have 2 different codecs on this camera for video. There's the All-i compression and the IPB compression. IPB is about 4 times smaller than the All-i compression. You might be thinking, oh, that's great, I can fit 4 times as much on my card and just shoot like crazy. Well, that's true, but to be honest with you, I shoot everything All-i, and the reason is it might take up 4 times more space on the card, but once I got on the computer, it's easier to edit with because it's easier on the processor, and you can also grade the images more if you want to really push the image later in post. And next up, we're going to talk about writing speeds. Writing speeds is very important. Reading speeds are also important on these cards, but writing speeds are more important because basically you're taking the information from the sensor, it's being passed through the buffer, and then it's being sent off to the card. Well, that stream of information is going very fast, and if one part of it can't keep up, something bad's going to happen. In this case, if the buffer is sending information to the card's like, I can't handle it, you're going to get a message like this that basically says movie has stopped automatically. Basically, your card just can't handle writing that fast. If you're coming from, let's say, T3i, and it's been writing fine with that particular card that you maybe bought years ago, and you put it into this camera and you're using the All-i compression, which requires more, it's usually 4 times larger, so the speed going to the card is just that much bigger. So basically, you're going to have to buy a new card if you're going to use the All-i compression. The ones I would recommend, back before we used to talk about class 6, class 10, I don't know, those to me didn't tell you much. Like what, class what, what does that mean? But like the numbers that are on these are great because the SanDisk actually tells you what's going on, what they're capable of writing and reading. For instance, this one here is a 45 megabyte per second card, and this is a 95. So the 45 will work totally fine. It works great for All-i compression. And the Extreme Pro is 95. And you might be asking, well, why should I get the Extreme Pro if this one works fine? Well, the only reason I'll tell you to get it, it is more expensive, but it offloads the reading part to your computer much faster. about twice as fast. So basically, instead of it taking, let's say, 8 minutes to offload your card with the 95 mega, you pretty much, it would be like maybe 16 minutes. I have never timed this, but I can tell you from experience, I just know that using this card is going to be a lot slower. And some of my even older cards, it's even slower than that. So if you're wanting to like a fast turnaround time and you want to get editing right away, putting stuff on the timeline and start editing, definitely invest in the faster card. And you know, you bought this amazing camera. It's a very expensive camera, and let's say you put really expensive glass on it and you spent all this money on sliders and glide cams and all this stuff. This is your last piece. This is your film, basically. Don't go cheap on this. Definitely buy good stuff that's not going to get corrupt. It's going to be writing fast, you're not dropping any frames, and you can get it onto your computer quickly. So definitely invest in good memory cards. All right, the last thing I want to talk about is this CF card. I bought this CF card because I want to shoot Magic Lantern RAW. So basically this camera with a Magic Lantern, which is a basically firmware that runs in parallel with the Canon firmware. And it goes well beyond the scope of this course. I'm not going to show you how to do it because it's not for beginners, but I just want to let you know the option is out there that you can, like as you shoot raw images with this camera and you can manipulate them a lot better than the JPEGs, you can shoot raw video and manipulate it far more than you can with the H.264 codecs that we have, like the All-i and the IPB codecs. So this card is extremely fast. The way the camera is built, architecture-wise, the electronics in it, you can write faster speeds to the CF slot than you can with the SD slot. So I just wanted to bring that up, that if you're wanting to go down that road with Magic Lantern, it's kind of use it at your own risk. I've been using it for years. I've never bricked the camera. I've never ruined a camera. It's never done anything, overheated it or caused any problems. But if you're real technically inclined and you want to dive into it, definitely I've got some videos on my site about Magic Lantern, how to install it, and some of them how to use it. So definitely check it out if you're a really techie kind of guy or a girl. All right, next up I want to talk about something that you might have already experienced and you might not know why it's happening, so I wanted to explain it to you. So in photography mode, turn the camera on, you got to take a picture, you hold up to your eye, you're taking pictures. Life is good. It's awesome. You look through the viewfinder, you can see exactly what you're seeing through the lens. And basically what's happening, turn the camera off, is there's a mirror, and the light hits the mirror, goes up into this area right here, and then comes out the viewfinder. Life is good. So then you go, okay, well, I want to shoot video, so we flip it over to the video mode. And then you hold it up to your eye and you're like, what? It's totally black. I can't see anything. You're like, what is going on? So basically what's happening, if we take the lens off again, turn the camera on, and in video mode what happens is that mirror goes up in the up position. So basically you can't see anything through the viewfinder, unfortunately. So the light enters and goes right to the sensor, basically. So in video mode, we have what's a shutter speed, and you might be thinking, if I take a whole bunch of pictures, I don't know how fast that is, 6 frames per second, we can do in stills mode, but when video mode, that's not actually what's happening 24 frames per second. It's not flapping up and down like that. There's what's called an electronic shutter, which we're going to talk more about later. But I just wanted to basically show you that that's what's happening, that's why you can't see. So what we do is we get a device like this. This is made by Carry Speed. I have it listed on my gear page. It's a lot cheaper than the Zacuto model out there. And basically you slide it right in here. And then what you do, you turn your camera on, go to video mode, and then this is especially for outside. You put this up to your eye, and now you can move around and focus, and you can see the screen really well. Inside, it's not that as big of a deal because you can just use a display. Or you can use a field monitor. Like you can take the HDMI out and have like a 7-inch or 6-inch and 4-inch. There's lots of different sizes you can get. But for outside use, especially on a sunny day, if the sun's coming back from behind you and hitting that screen, let's say there's snow on the ground, you can't see the screen. You can maybe make out a little bit of what's going on there, but not accurately to do exposure or focus. And this is what this thing is great for, is exposure and focus when you hold it up to your eye. This particular model has an adjustment, a dioptric type of adjustment, so if you have glasses or something. And you can also take this thing off and flip it around if you use your other eye, for instance. But I just want to make a mention of that, and so that is why you can't use the viewfinder, unfortunately, in video mode. All right, I'm next to a road, and I'm going to be doing some examples of what image stabilization can do for your shots. I'm going to be kind of run through some really worst case scenarios. This is something you probably wouldn't be doing, but it'll give a really good example of what image stabilization can do for you. So when you're buying a brand new lens, you should, one of the most important features you should be thinking about is definitely image stabilization, especially on a longer lens like this 7200, which we'll demonstrate here in a second. So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to take the camera off the tripod. You really should be using the tripod if you've got one and you can do that kind of shot, especially with a 7200. As you can hear, we got some trucks going by. I'm going to wait for a car to come up next, and here comes one. I'm just basically going to handhold without the image stabilization turned on. It's image stabilization turned off, and let's move this up out of the way, actually. Here comes a truck. I'm going to hit record now. I'm going to try my best to keep that truck right in the center of the frame. I'm actually not doing too bad, but what happens is the longer I hold it, the more little micro shakes from me just the weight of the camera. And as you can see, as I'm getting towards the bend here, there's a lot of little micro shakes, especially as he's rounding the corner. All right, I hit stop. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn the image stabilization on. All right, I hear a car coming, and I'm going to press record now. I'm going to track this car, and as you can see, starting off very smooth, and my arms are starting to get a little fatigued, but those little micro shakes as I'm taking them through the corner here are doing pretty darn good. So image stabilization, awesome. You can see it just makes, this is a really worst case scenario. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to attach the viewfinder to the camera. So now I've obviously had 2 points of contact. Now I'm going to add a third with my head or my eye, basically. This is usually a pretty busy road. I had to wait a while for another car to come, but here comes one. We get ready and hit record now. And it's really easy now that I've got 3 points of contact to track this guy. Put him right in the center of the frame. And here we go around the corner. My arms don't feel as fatigued. So yes, much better. So 3 points of contact, image stabilization, and of course, if you've got the tripod, use the tripod. I won't show an example because it's a lot more fluid. Now let's go ahead. What the heck, we're here, and I hear another car coming. See if I can get this adjusted right. And we'll hit record now. So the next thing I want to talk about as I'm tracking this truck is I will leave image stabilization turned on like it is now. Look at that, is just awesome. I am tracking this guy perfectly. Of course, my arms aren't getting fatigued. I got to shift my weight. I didn't start the pan. I should have moved my body over a little bit, but that's okay. Yeah, awesome though. When I'm using image stabilization, I will do it, if I'm doing a pan like that, it works just fine. If you have a static shot where it's just totally locked off, and it's just like it is right now, then I would turn image stabilization off, because what will happen is your nonlinear editor, it'll make little micro moves, even though it doesn't have to. So definitely turn it off. And what you to, if you ever want to see what it does, put it into your nonlinear editor and then have it locked off and just run like 15-20 seconds or so, and then just take and quickly scrub through the timeline if you got a fast computer, and you'll actually see the frame kind of move around a little bit. So it's best not to do it on a locked off shot. If you were using, let's say, a glide cam or some sort of gimbal type device, since I am not that good at it, I typically leave the image stabilization turned on. And some lenses, you'll have to check your owner's manual. Some lenses don't care if you have the image stabilization turned on while you're locked off on a tripod. All right, next up I want to talk about rolling shutter. Something you're going to have to deal with on just about every Canon camera or Nikon camera or Panasonic camera. All the DSLRs basically do this. It's just something to be aware of. It most likely you won't even see it that often, depending on what shooting style you do. I mean, if you're doing like interviews and stuff like that all the time, or documentaries, you probably won't. But if you're doing like action films, you're gonna probably run into this. And it's most exaggerated, at least I've found, like using the 70-200, a longer lens. You won't see this as much on a super wide angle lens, like maybe if you go down to 16 millimeters, you're probably not gonna see it as much. But so what is it? Let me demonstrate it for you really quick. It's the best way I can describe it. I've got a power pole way off in the distance, and I'm just gonna go handheld here. And what I'm gonna do is hold it up here, take my glasses off. These glasses are polarized, so as soon as I put my eye up with the glasses on, I can't see anything because it just totally, you can't see the screen, which is really odd. All right, so what I'm gonna do is, let's go ahead and focus. Okay, now I'm gonna hit record, and I'm gonna start moving the camera back and forth. I'll go down, and then I'll go back up to the top of the power line. And what you'll notice, and maybe I can even stop one of these frames, is you'll notice that the power pole, which is normally, you know, straight up and down, has become skewed. It's doing this kind of jello-y kind of effect. So what's happening basically with rolling shutter is, if you're shooting at 24 frames per second, well, each frame is not captured at that exact moment, instant in time. What's happening is, on the sensor, it's recording lines, and it starts at the top, horizontal lines, and then it gets to the bottom. Well, it happens super, super fast, but there is a time difference between the top and the bottom when it's done scanning. So what happens is you get this kind of jello skewing effect. It's kind of a distortion, basically. So there's a few things you can, you know, when you're doing action film, you should stay away from. Well, you probably won't be using like the 200 millimeters and shaking the camera around violently. But a lot of times what I've found is if you use a very wide angle lens, you won't see this as much. It'll still be there, but one of the other places you'll notice this is, let's say you're got your camera locked off like this is, and let's say a car is going by or a train is going by really fast. Well, if you were to stop it and look at one of the frames, you'll notice that the train is kind of like bent over, or, you know, distorted a little bit, like maybe 10 degrees over from a perfect vertical. And so it's just something you have to pay attention to. It's, you know, depending on your shooting style, like I said, if you're doing documentaries and most of the stuff you're doing is interviews, you're never gonna notice it. But if you're one of these people that do a lot of action, definitely keep it in mind. If you're shaking the camera around violently to get that kind of effect or dramatic effect of, you know, violence, or, you know, putting somebody into the scene by shaking the camera around, the way you shake it, you just gotta be careful of how much skew you're gonna introduce into the frame. All right, next up, we've got to talk about aliasing. Luckily, the 5D Mark III has an anti-aliasing filter built into it. Many of the other Canon cameras do not. The Rebel line, the 6D, 7D, 70D, 60D, all the ones don't have an anti-aliasing filter built in. And basically what that does is it prevents horizontal lines, or let me show you an example. When I hit record here, on our power line, it's got a lot of horizontal lines, and usually it's not the ones that are perfectly horizontal, it's the ones that are slightly tilted. I don't know if you can hear this, but there's a cow not too far off. It's making a whole bunch of noise. But basically, if it's slightly like a degree or two difference from horizontal, that particular line, let's say the power line like this one, you will notice that it gets some very jagged edges. And I will cut to what you'll see like on a 7D or a 60D, and it can be quite nasty, especially at lower resolutions like 720. You won't see it as much at 1080, but you'll definitely get it more when you drop to 720. Now, that being said, you know, it also happens on patterns like a knit shirt or a jacket that has a lot of horizontal and vertical patterns that are tightly knit. And it depends where you are and where you're zoomed, because obviously I can't do it on this camera because it's got such a good filter, but as you zoom in, I'll hit record, as you zoom out and then you zoom in, you'll notice that it gets better or worse. And the same thing happens with clothes and patterns. Like if you're doing an interview, you're going to have a situation where the clothes will actually start dancing around with the moire pattern. So what you can do is either zoom with your feet or zoom with the lens and change that. Also, you can try changing your aperture to a lower aperture like f2.8. So let's say you have something in the background, like somebody is right there and we've got the power line in the background, and you can see those jagged lines, which you probably won't see too much on the 5D Mark III, but you'll see on other cameras like the 7D. You just definitely want to pay attention to that. All right, recently I was interviewing a volleyball coach, and she had a tight knit jacket, tight knit pattern on her jacket, and it wasn't causing moire, but it was definitely causing some distraction to the frame. So, which is, when I was looking at it on this small little display, I couldn't see it, unfortunately. So if you're in an interview situation where somebody is wearing a jacket like this, you definitely want to pay attention to it. Maybe try to go to like f2.8 and get her eyes in focus, and maybe pull enough of her jacket out of focus. That might help. Or, and again, it's hard to tell because on the display it might look totally fine. So what you might also do is get an external monitor, like a 7-inch monitor, where you can view it at a larger size, and then usually in that situation you'll be able to see those type of patterns. And as you can see in this example, one of the things I did to kind of hide it, because I didn't notice it at the time when I was recording, so I just kind of put a lower third over the bottom of her, or across her jacket, and hopefully that kind of got rid of that distraction a little bit.